friends. So I wanted to make a quick little video about feeding a starter, just so that if you guys were nervous about doing it, just kind of want to show you what I do. And I apologize if there's noise. Peter's cleaning off the deck right now. Obviously, I'm super fancy dressed up today. Anyway, so here's my starter. Okay, I want to show you guys, there is a little bit of liquid on top. That is normal. The longer you go between feedings, the more that liquid will build up. Right now, mine kind of has I can't really see it very well, has a little bit of a grayish tinge to it. The longer it sits, the more gray it'll look. Totally normal, totally fine. What that is, that's alcohol. That is a result of the fermentation going on. And it actually is what also makes it really nice and sour. So the longer you let it sit, the bigger that layer gets. And the only time you really have to worry about it is if you actually see legit fuzz or black spots or, funky colors. Sometimes it'll look a little pink. Again, that's normal enough to be a little pink. But again, if you see anything really growing, or if it, learn the smell of what's normal. I know it's gonna sound weird. But I've only had one batch really go bad on me, and that's because it really dried out and it really got kind of gross. So I tend to be a little bit compulsive about getting as much as possible out of the jar. That is completely just me, because I don't like all that flour going down my sink, and it can kind of clog things up a little bit. So you do want to make sure, if you've done any baking, you probably already know this, but you want to make sure that you really give it a lot of water to get this out. Now, one of the other recommendations is don't reuse the same container when you go to store it, because that kind of, again, could lead to mold issues and things like that. So I don't put it right back in the same jar unless I'm going to pretty much reuse it right away. If I were to bake something with this tomorrow, then I'd go ahead and just whatever, doesn't matter. So I have 2 cups of starter. So what I want to do is double it. If your starter has been sitting for a long time, then you actually are going to use a lot less of this, and you're going to feed it a lot more and do multiple smaller feedings. You can, if you have 2 tablespoons of starter, you can bring it back. So really don't worry about it too much. I've never thrown out a bunch. I've always just made excessive amounts and then found a recipe that used 2 cups of starter and, made a few batches of bread or whatever. So anyway, this is your basic feeding though. So I've got 2 cups of starter. Each of you has 1 to 1.5, 2 cups, somewhere in there. So I'm going to add 1 cup of water. This is lukewarm water. Some people are picky about it being tap water or filtered or whatever. I use tap water. We're on city water, not well water. I don't worry about it too much. But again, we'll call it, let's see. I like to reuse things instead of dirtying 100 things. But yeah, just warm to the touch. You don't want it to be hot. You don't want it to be cold. So somewhere in the middle. Hi. And so I always mix the water in first and get it nice and liquidy. So again, you're just kind of breaking it all up. And you'll notice some bubbles on the top. And then we add the flour. So again, I put in 1 cup of water, so I know I'm going to add about 2 cups of flour. If it's not a full 2 cups, that's okay. Again, you really kind of want to make sure that you're looking at the consistency of it too, because you want it to be pancake batter like. I like to add 1 cup at a time, mix it in real good, then add the other one. Now I'm whisking by hand. You can use a hand mixer, you can use a stand mixer. I just don't feel like dirtying my whole big KitchenAid for this. Sometimes, I use the paddle, I've used the whisk. There's really no wrong way of doing it. It's just kind of a matter of what you want to do. But I mix it up. Looks like most of the lumps are gone. And again, this is, I'm gonna tilt this down. Okay, it's pretty runny still. Still pretty liquidy, pretty watery. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a second cup. Now I'm just using all-purpose, unbleached, store brand flour. I think my mom used all-purpose bleached flour. Again, it really doesn't matter. You can keep starters going if you are really particular to a certain type of flour, like if you really like rye or whatever. I've heard of starter recipes that have that, and of course it's all going to start to take on slightly different flavors and stuff. Ooh, this is pretty thick. So, you know, it's really just kind of a matter of what you want to do. I like to keep it with the all-purpose flour because then it's good for not just bread, but again, King Arthur website, one of the early recipes I did was their carrot cake, and that was actually very good. And you know, you hear sourdough and you think sourdough like you would get at Wegmans or whatever. And that's actually a San Francisco style sourdough. It's a very specific type of flavor. Now again, this is a little bit thick. Call that somewhere between pancake and biscuits. So I'm gonna add a little bit more water to it. And just kind of mix it in a little bit more. We have left the sourdough starter that thick before. Again, what that really translates to is you're just gonna add less flour, most likely, to whatever recipe you're making. Because at a certain point you just don't you don't want extra flour. So anyway, the typical sourdough flavor that you think of is that San Francisco style, and it all depends on the type of wild yeast that's caught. Now my mom again started this starter. She lives in Delaware, so the yeast from different areas all have their own kind of unique flavor to it. And so obviously this doesn't quite have that same flavor, even though it does have that very distinct sourdough smell. But the carrot cake made from it, you know, you wouldn't be like, oh, sourdough. Ooh. Like it's just a really nice cake. So that looks about right. Again, I could probably add a little bit more water. If it starts to pull off of the mixer like that, you know, the beater, that's a pretty good sign. I think I'm going to go ahead and just leave it like this. Well, maybe I'll add a little bit more water. And so the other thing I'm going to do, I'm sending you guys this video today, but I'm going to go ahead and set up a little, set it up and show you guys what it looks like after it's sat out and left to rise for a bit. Not like a bread rise, but it's just to let it get active so that you can see that your starter is still good. And again, if you don't see that activity, I'd actually be kind of surprised. Sometimes it just takes longer. If you've let it sit for longer, then it's going to take longer to become more active again. But so I ended up adding about another quarter to a half cup, something like that, of water. Anyway, what was I saying? There we go. That's a little bit better. So the longer you've gone between using your starter, the longer it may take to become active. And so I know that people who are using it all the time and like literally every day, you can feed it and then you'll see it bounce back like that same day, like 12 hours, 6 to 12 hours, you'll see it. Now this was fed, I think about 2 weeks ago, a week ago. What is time, right? In the age of Corona, who knows? So anyway, so since I fed it relatively recently though, this should probably only take 12 hours, will be plenty of time. And so again, because I don't like flour going down the drain, if I can avoid it, get that off. And then, again, I like to store it in either mason jars, or I've stored it right in this Pyrex bowl. But you know, the bigger containers just take up more space. And again, you only want to fill it about halfway, because when this rises and becomes active, it's going to double in volume. So you're going to need that extra space. And certainly we have a great pancake recipe and pancake and waffle recipe that I think is from King Arthur. And you make this, I know it has a name and I can't think of what the name is. You make this very, very active thing with the starter, and you let it sit overnight, and then the next day you finish adding to the recipe. Well, that first thing, it just will rise to the top of a container, and it just, there's this like satisfying bubbliness to it that it's just funny. Anyway, not being as compulsive as I normally am. But one of the things that you don't really want to do, you don't want to leave this with a metal lid on it. Again, I have my typical metal KitchenAid bowl here. I've let it sit overnight in that metal bowl. If it's one night, probably not a big deal, like if you're going to use it right away the next day. But you don't want the starter to sit next to metal. You want glass or ceramic. Plastics, it can leach, it can kind of mix in with the chemistry of the plastic. So again, that's not really that good. And so really, the purpose for this is just to kind of keep stuff out, keep the moisture in, but you really don't want it to come into contact with the starter as much as you can avoid it. If it does a little bit, it's not that big of a deal. But you can see I reused the piece of saran wrap or whatever, cling wrap that I had on there because it was clean, nothing on it. And to try to stay green, I know some people may have the reusable wax paper. That's probably fine. Just make sure it's clean before you put it on there. But yeah, simple as that. If I hadn't talked so much, it'd be probably less than 10 minutes. All right, so anyway, that's how you feed your starter. I'm gonna let these sit out overnight. Certainly it's currently 6:30, so I'm gonna let these sit out overnight, and I'll show you guys a picture of tonight before I go to bed, and then probably take another picture in the morning. And then at that point, I'll probably put it in the fridge just to keep it going a little bit slower so that it doesn't become so crazy active that it can kind of burn itself out. It'll slow down in the refrigerator as far as how active it is, but it doesn't completely become inactive. But you want to give it some time to get started. I've put it right in the fridge right away. It's not that big of a deal. Again, it just makes it more slow to get going. So I like to let it sit out for a bit. So that's that. Bye.